round off the endocrine series, and it is to go over both the function of thyroid hormones and how we control growth. And we put both together because the two systems interact and are very important for one another. So this lecture aims to go over what your thyroid gland does, the hormones that it synthesizes, look at their target cells and their receptors, look at the kind of pathophysiology associated with thyroid hormones, and they're very common. So we expect to see this within the population. You've probably got family members who are affected by thyroid hormone status issues. And then to look at the control of growth. And growth hormone is the key hormone that regulates our postnatal body growth. But it's affected by loads of other factors, and one of those key factors is our thyroid hormone status. So we'll look at growth, look at the normal way that we grow as humans, taking in the growth spurts. So we all grow very fast around the time of puberty, and then we along those views and we reach our adult height. And then consider some of the factors that control cellular growth. So our thyroid gland is located in front of our trachea. You can feel it. It moves around as you swallow. And it produces, as its name suggests, the thyroid hormones. And they're key to all of our basic metabolism. Have too little of them, and we feel very cold, we gain a lot of weight, there's not so much protein turnover, so your nails break, your hair gets very brittle, it doesn't grow, you lose a lot of hair, even your eyebrows fall out if you've got too few thyroid hormones. Have too many of them, and have too many thyroid hormones, and you'll be very agitated, you'll be very jittery, you'll be really thin, and you won't feel the cold. So you'll be walking down in your short sleeves and shorts down Gower Street at this time of year. Even though it is quite mild today, but even when it's frosty outside, you won't feel the cold. So those hormones have a real key role in our basic metabolism. This is the face of the thyroid sitting around the hyaline cartilage here in the trachea. But if you look at the back face of the thyroid, it has these additional glands embedded in it. And that's the parathyroid glands. So they're embedded in the thyroid, but they're not the thyroid gland tissue. So they're additional glands, but they're inside the capsule that's covering the thyroid gland. And the parathyroid hormones produce, parathyroid glands produce parathyroid hormone, which is involved in calcium regulation, and also the thyroid glands themselves produce an additional hormone, calcitonin. So when you look at calcium regulation, that's covered in the computer-assisted learning session, so it's like a mini lecture, all online for you. You just download the slides, put them in a PowerPoint show, and there's lots of hyperlinks that you can click to. So it's a little condensed mini lecture for you to go through. So that content is examinable as well. It's like a lecture, treat it in the same way. So when we look at different endocrine axes, i.e. how the different organ systems that make up a chemical signaling pathway within endocrinology, the thyroid axis starts with TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, in the hypothalamus, being released coming down through the portal vessels down to the anterior pituitary gland. And within the anterior pituitary gland, TRH stimulates the production and release of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And it's TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, released from the anterior pituitary gland, and it's made and released from the thyrotroph cells of the anterior pituitary gland, and it acts on the cells within the thyroid gland to stimulate the production of the thyroid hormones. Those hormones, like most endocrine systems, have a negative feedback effect. So if we make lots of thyroid hormones, it feeds back and turns down TSH production and release from the anterior pituitary, and also production and release of TRH from the hypothalamic neurons as well. So when these levels go up, TSH and TRH should go down. If we don't make enough of these hormones, there's less negative feedback, so we should see higher levels of TRH and TSH trying to drive the thyroid to make thyroid hormones. When we look at the circulating levels of thyroid hormones, we see that there's two of them, there's T3 and T4, and the numbers, I'll explain their names in much more detail. They've got lots of very complicated biochemical names, but the numbers are associated with how many iodines are attached to the molecule as it's made. So T4 thyroxine is the precursor molecule. There's much more of it. There's about 100-fold more of T4 than there is of T3. But T3 is the biologically active element, and T4 has to be converted to T3, i.e. it's got to lose an iodine. T3 has 3 iodines attached to the active molecule to make it biologically active and bind to its receptor. So there's more T4, but the biologically active element is T3. So when we zoom in on our stylized view of the thyroid gland, it's made up of what we call follicular cells. And thyroid follicles are made up of a collection of epithelial cells surrounding an area of colloid. And this is our defined small extracellular space where the thyroid hormones can be made and stored. Now, most hormones are either made on demand or stored for very short periods of time. These can be minutes, sometimes a few days. Thyroid hormones are very unusual. They can be stored for months. You often have 3 months' supply of thyroid hormones stored in your thyroid at any one time. So if you suddenly leave the UK and you find yourself up in the Andes, up in very mountainous areas where iodine is not prevalent in the diet, then you can happily survive there for 3 months without having to take iodine supplementation. So our thyroid adjusts and releases that iodine back into the supply to be able to make enough thyroid hormones. So this is a very unusual cellular activity. It stores this thyroid hormone embedded in a meshwork within these thyroid follicles. So they're a collection of cells that store their product in the middle of the follicle. Around the follicles we find C cells, often called clear cells because they look a little clearer, their nucleus is clearer than the normal epithelial cells, and you can find them under the basement membrane or between the different thyroid follicles, and they make calcitonin, so regulating calcium. We also see a lot of blood capillaries. The thyroid is very vascular, so if you've got someone that's got an overactive thyroid, you can actually put a stethoscope against the thyroid and hear the blood rushing through the thyroid gland. It's called a brute, and you can hear the fast flow of blood simply by attaching a stethoscope to the thyroid. The thyroid, the TSH receptors sit on the outside of the follicle, and all of these processes to make thyroid hormones are driven by the action of TSH through its receptors. We also have some lymphatic vessels and some nerve endings, but we won't look at the regulation through sympathetic nerves today. So, the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones plays a key role in our metabolism. And the 3 things that the thyroid is involved in is the production and the accumulation of the raw materials to build the thyroid hormones. The thyroid hormones are built on in a very unusual way, so they're built on a scaffolding protein, and then that scaffolding protein has to be digested to release the thyroid hormones. So this unusual process of storing a hormone extracellularly but within a defined area on a scaffold backbone keeps it in place and means it's got this extended half-life. So all of these processes are regulated by the release of thyroid-stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. And this is regulated by a series of transporters and enzymes. So if you take iodine in your diet, or you're exposed to radioactive iodine as a source, that iodine will be sequestered by the body and it will congregate in your thyroid. So anyway, if you've ever seen it on the TV when there's been a leak of radioactivity, the first thing they'll do is take a Geiger counter across your thyroid, because it will go there really, really quickly. We don't have many thyroid transporters, and most of them are located in your thyroid gland. The rest of the iodine in your body has nowhere to be stored and will just be excreted out in urine, because kidneys are very effective at that. So a majority of iodine will be trapped in the body in the thyroid gland. The enzyme that's used to produce thyroid hormones is thyroid peroxidase, and it's built on this backbone called thyroglobulin. So this is the structure of the key thyroid hormones, T4 and T3. So as you see, there's lots more T4, and it's active in the circulation for up to about a week. Whereas T3 has a half-life around about 1 to 3 days. And this T4 has to be converted to T3 in tissues to then make it biologically active. So we see we've got inner rings and outer rings, which in T4 are fully iodinated, and in T3 we lose one of the outer ring iodines to turn it into the active T3 product. So when we look at the chemistry of T3 and T4, the basic raw material is the amino acid tyrosine. And basically, a tyrosine is joined to another tyrosine to generate T4 and T3, and then the associated iodines are added by thyroid peroxidase. So the full name of T4 is L3,5,3'5' tetraiodothyronine. It's quite a mouthful. T4 is widely given in the population to replace thyroid hormones if they're missing. And as I said, this is quite a common occurrence in the population. So quite a lot of people take thyroxine. It can be taken as an oral tablet once a day and normalises thyroid function throughout life. T3 or L3,5,3'triiodothyronine, again, T3 is a much easier way to say that, has one of the outer ring iodines removed to be more biologically active. Now, the two tyrosines are linked together to generate this double aromatic ring structure, and the number and position of those iodines is very important. So as I said, an outer ring iodine is removed to make T3 from T4, and if we by accident removed an inner ring iodine, then the molecule has no known biological activity. And in some tissues, we regulate thyroid function in that way. So because we provide the body with 3 months' supply of thyroid hormones, how do you regulate how active those thyroid hormones are going to be? Well, you can regulate the local level of a thyroid hormone by having the enzymes that can knock those iodines off the molecules and either make them more active or less active, depending on that organ system's requirements. So we can make inactive forms by removing inner ring iodines, and this is referred to as reverse T3. It's an inactive form. Or we can knock off more than one iodine and produce also T2, T1, etc. So when we make thyroid hormones, all of those processes are stimulated by the presence of thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH, that's been released from the anterior pituitary gland, and relies on the enzyme thyroid peroxidase to catalyse the reactions to build the thyroid hormones in the first place. So, in textbooks you'll see that within the thyroid we need to organify the iodine. That means add the iodine to the active molecules to generate thyroid hormones. And then we need to synthesize the thyroid hormones themselves, and then we have to think about releasing them. So the first thing to do is, as I said, iodine is trapped within the thyroid, it's taken up because there's a thyroid transporter that moves iodine into these follicular cells within the thyroid, and then the iodine is transported into that colloid space between, inside the follicle, surrounded by the follicular cells, as we've just shown on the top here. And within that colloid, this backbone structure called thyroglobulin has lots of iodination sites, lots of tyrosine sitting there ready to accept the iodine molecules, and therefore the thyroid hormones are built on this large protein backbone and can be stored there. Then to release thyroid hormones, this colloid material is ingested back into these cells. The vesicular structures are then merged with lysosomes, and they digest away the backbone and release T3 and T4 free into the cell. Now, in the past it was thought T3 and T4, because they've got this ring structure, they're quite amphiphilic, so they can, in theory, act like steroids and pass across plasma membranes. We now know that there's thyroid hormone transporters that are involved in the process of release and uptake of thyroid hormones. So the thyroid hormones are then transported out of the cell, and they bind to transport proteins, thyroglobulin binding globulin, and they are then transported in the blood to areas of activity. So the majority of cells throughout the body. Now we know that the iodination process can be inhibited by various substances, so we know there's lots of actinides in cabbage that can inhibit your thyroid hormone function. There's lots of different drugs like thyrourea, an old one that's still talked about, PTU, propylthiouracil. It just prevents that iodination step to produce lots of thyroid hormones. And therefore it can be used if someone has an overactive thyroid to reduce the amount of thyroid hormones that a person is releasing into their circulation. We can also block the uptake of iodine by giving other molecules that are going to block the transporter, such as bromide, nitrite, and thiocyanate. Can all poison this transporter, leaving the iodine in blood, very little other iodine transporters, so the iodine is excreted into the urine. So when we look in detail at a thyroid follicle, so this is a thyroid follicle here, so it's bounded in these dark purple cells, and the pink area in the middle is the thyroglobulin, that's the collar, that's the storage product. You also find lighter cells here, in other situations, and they're the C cells, the calcitonin-producing cells between each follicles. If we take a piece of thyroid and wash away all this thyroglobulin in the middle and look at the inner surface area, then we see here in scanning EM, the surface of these follicular cells are covered in microvilli. So they've got large areas, large surface areas where they can be releasing their products and also reabsorbing the product when it wants to be digested to release active thyroid hormones. So we've got microvilli and also a bit of secretory products, so a bit of thyroglobulin left behind on the thyroid. So thyroid disease is pretty common. It's much more common in third world countries. So we would very rarely see a goiter like this in the UK. You would have to go back to historic files, and there's a beautiful museum down in King's which has beautiful oil paintings of different goiters that were seen in London in the 1800s. So very uncommon now. But if you go into Africa or very landlocked countries, particularly at high altitude, you will see goiters. So, yeah, the last time I saw a lot of goiters and people just walking around in the population was in Tenerife. You don't have to go very far in Europe to find hilly areas where you will see endemic thyroid disease. But in the UK, very rare to see something like this. So, goiter is an expansion of the cell volume size within the thyroid. And it comes about from the thyroid trying to drive its activity and make thyroid hormones. And these goiters tend to occur in areas of iodine deficiency. As I say, it doesn't tend to happen in the UK because you'll find that salt and bread contain iodine. And iodine is added to these products to alleviate iodine deficiency. And it's done so across the world. Postnatally, iodine deficiency causes you to slow down mentally. People have mental impairments, can cause deafness, paralysis, etc. But the majority of the effects are caused in infancy. In individuals who develop this in later life, it can be reversed by supplementation and bringing back normal diet. So in individuals, so young individuals, this can cause permanent nerve damage because we need our thyroid hormones to lay down our normal CNS structure and function. Then if this doesn't occur, then it can be permanent impairment. So across the world there are screening programs for hypothyroidism because early intervention can reverse the damage that's caused to the nervous system due to lack of thyroid hormones. So it took me many years before I saw my first cretin child. It's not common and it's very much screened for these days and has been eradicated in most countries. But the permanent derangement of mental capacity can easily be avoided by very cheap supplementation. So other forms of hypothyroidism that are seen can be driven by the immune system. And that's autoimmune destruction of the thyroid from aberrant presentation of thyroid proteins within the immune system. And again, these people feel very cold, they lose a lot of hair, have mental impairment, and changes in weight gain. So this is an adult who has thyroid hormone insufficiency. And as I said, you would lose a lot of hair, these people tend to slow down, be very sluggish. It's not uncommon to admit granny to hospital saying, oh, she's lost her marbles, complete dementia. And you go, let's have a blood test. And you go, oh, she's hypothyroid. Give her thyroxine for a week or two and she's back to the old person she used to be and functioning again. It has that much detrimental effect on your metabolism across the whole body. So this is this lady 6 months later, full head of hair again, functioning normally. So thyroid disease is very common in the population. Not only is there underproduction of thyroid hormones, but there's also overproduction of thyroid hormones. And the most common form is called Graves' disease and has this kind of mad, staring-eyed appearance. It's caused by enlargement of the muscles at the back of the eye, causing the eye to actually protrude beyond the normal eyeball socket. And it's caused by, again, this time, an immune system effect, antibodies that recognize the TSH receptor. Remember the TSH receptor, main receptor driving all the thyroid action. And these antibodies bind to the TSH receptor. You don't need the ligand there, you don't need TSH there. The antibodies bind to the receptor as if they are a hormone and activate the receptor in an unusual way. So we get over-activation of the receptor due to these unusual antibodies. So it causes goiter, causes enlargement of the thyroid, protrusion of the eyeballs, people lose weight, they're very nervous, and their basic metabolic rate is very high. So they struggle to keep weight on. Now, the way the receptors normally function for thyroid hormones is that they are nuclear receptors, they are internal receptors, because the thyroid hormones can gain access to cells through their transporters. You'll find in old textbooks they say that thyroid hormones can just dissociate into cells. And they bind like steroid hormone receptors with their ligand inside the cell. Now for many of these steroid hormone type receptors, they're bound to heat shock proteins and which stops them binding to DNA and activating gene transcription. And only when the ligand binds do we see conformational changes, release of the heat shock proteins, and therefore release or uncovering of the zinc fingers that will stick them into the grooves of the DNA and activate transcription. Again, these types of steroid receptors, they often dimerize, not necessarily with the same receptor. So we get combinations with retinoic acid and the different steroid hormone receptors can heterodimerize. They don't need to dimerize with their own type of receptor. But when we look very closely at how thyroid hormone receptors work, is that they can bind to other receptors, as I said, the retinoic H receptor. And in this situation, the thyroid hormone receptor does actually bind to DNA in the absence of its ligands. But it binds a whole range of inhibitors or co-repressor proteins that stop transcription going ahead. And only when T3 binds to the receptor are the repressors released, and therefore it can activate gene transcription. So we find the thyroid hormone receptors already bound to their hormone response element within the nucleus, waiting for T3 to come along, remove the repressor, and activate gene transcription. So, thyroid hormone action is also regulated not only from its nuclear receptor, but also many steroid-type hormones undergo enzymic modification. So we've already talked about T4 being converted to T3, and these conversions take place in different tissues across the body because our thyroid hormones bind throughout our body tissues. They're governing all of the basic metabolism of our cells. And we find in a range of tissues a number of enzymes called seleno-deiodinases. Seleno, i.e. they contain the particle selenium, deiodinase because they remove an iodine from the molecule. So they're an enzyme that removes an iodine to convert T4 to T3. Now in the brain and in the pituitary and in a number of peripheral tissues, we see both type 1 and type 2 seleno-deiodinases to increase thyroid hormone function. In other tissues, we see that they can regulate thyroid hormone function by decreasing the activity of thyroid hormones to remove iodines in an inner ring, and therefore we see T3 and T4 being converted to reverse T3 or down to T2 or T1. So the type 3 seleno-deiodinases are there to decrease activity if we've got too much thyroid hormone floating around in the system. So, in summary, when you look at thyroid hormones, we've got TRH produced from the hypothalamus. It comes down the hypophyseal portal vessel down to the anterior pituitary, where it acts on the thyrotroph cells to produce thyroid-stimulating hormone. Thyroid-stimulating hormone acts at its receptor to stimulate thyroid hormone production, storage, and release from the thyroid itself. The circulating levels of T3 and T4 are regulated by enzymes that contain selenium, and we have a normal negative feedback mechanism to regulate TSH and TRH. The activity of T4 is much lower than T3. It has to be converted to T3 to be biologically active. And the actions of thyroid are to change our basic metabolic rates, and also it promotes growth and development as we grow in humans, both prenatally and postnatally. So this is the time I want to move on to control of growth. Growth itself is a very complicated process. It has genetic elements, it's got a lot of endocrine functionality, but we're also susceptible to many environmental factors such as our day-to-day nutrition. So the overall way that we grow involves a range of protein cell division, protein synthesis, across many different cell types within the body. Now when we look at just how we grow in terms of what height we become, that is pretty much predetermined by your parents. So you can estimate what height you're going to be by taking what's called the mid-parental height, measuring mum and dad and saying you'll be somewhere in the middle. And it's usually not that far off. But there are many other factors that affect how you grow. And early on, nutrition is very much the leading light in that. But our overall height is really dependent on how our vertebral column grows and how long our long bones in our legs grow. They're the key determining factors. So let's have a look at some of the ways the hormones influence our growth. So our growth is regulated by the hormone called growth hormone. And growth hormone is regulated by two hypothalamic hormones, growth hormone releasing hormone and somatostatin. And growth hormone releasing hormone does, as its name suggests, it acts to release growth hormone from the growth hormone producing cells of the anterior pituitary, the somatotroph cells. And this action is through stimulatory G protein, so it's a protein bound to a GS internally. And somatostatin inhibits those actions by activating an inhibitory G protein, a GI. The production of growth hormone is episodic. That means it comes in pulses throughout the day, and we produce most of our growth hormone at night. So when your mum used to say, you need to go to bed now to grow up big and strong, it's not too far-fetched. You produce most of your growth and most of your growth hormone at night. So throughout the day, you'll have some pulses of growth hormone, but these will double or triple in size overnight and are influenced by our different patterns of REM sleep. So we secrete that growth hormone in this pulsatile manner, and it affects a whole range of body tissues. So there's growth hormone receptors expressed throughout the body tissues. The highest concentration of those growth hormone receptors are found in our liver. And some of the effects of growth hormone are believed to be indirect by growth hormone acting in the liver, and the liver producing an intermediate growth factor called insulin-like growth factor 1. So growth hormone can act directly, and it can also act in concert with IGF-1 to make our cells grow and differentiate. Like most other endocrine systems, growth hormone and IGF-1 have a negative feedback effect on their production. Produce lots of growth hormone and you'll reduce growth hormone releasing hormone, you'll increase somatostatin to give you a balance of overall hormone output. The regulation of growth hormone by these two hypothalamic factors, they are small hypothalamic peptides. So growth hormone releasing hormone is only 10 amino acids long, somatostatin is 14 amino acids long, and they activate these G protein coupled receptors to change the expression of adenylyl cyclase, and you can measure changes in cyclic AMP in response to growth hormone releasing hormone or somatostatin application to these cells. The growth hormone that's produced is a single chain polypeptide. It's got a couple of disulfide bonds holding it together, and the major form is 22 kilodaltons in size. There is a minor form, but it seems to have the same activity as the larger form. But it's only active for about 15 minutes once it's released from the anterior pituitary. So we're producing a lot of growth hormone all of the time because it's turned over very quickly. And ancestrally, growth hormone is related to prolactin. And in some species, there's an overlap of growth hormone and prolactin binding between their relevant receptors. Within the pituitary cells, the activation of these receptors sets up a cascade which stimulates cyclic AMP, CREB, and binds to different different transcription factors on a variety of genes. To make growth hormone, you have to stimulate the transcription factor called PIT1. So it's pituitary-specific transcription factor 1. So PIT1, again, is a homeodomain peptide. It binds to DNA and is known to have specific genetic patterning to generate growth hormone-producing cells. Don't have this transcription factor, you don't produce growth hormone. In terms of the regulation of growth hormone output, we've got a number of factors that stimulate growth hormone. Thyroid hormones are key to that, so we need adequate amounts of thyroid hormones. We also need adequate amounts of gonadal hormones. So we need the steroids coming out of the ovaries and the testes, as well as basic metabolism. Growth is also stimulated by adequate amounts of protein products. So here the amino acid arginine is key to stimulating growth hormone function. We only grow when we've got enough nutrients to allow us to grow. Other factors which are inhibitory are our stress hormones, cortisol. Too much stress will reduce growth potential. Glucose, I'll come back to in a second why glucose is detrimental and inhibits growth hormone. And also the breakdown of lots of fat products producing free fatty acids have a negative effect on growth hormone. There are other factors apart from somatostatin in growth hormone-releasing hormone, and the newer textbooks will also add in the hormone ghrelin. And ghrelin is a peptide produced from our stomach that makes us eat and regulates our growth hormone secretion as a protective mechanism against us starving to death. So when we're really, really hungry and there's a lack of nutrients around, we produce growth hormone because it prevents our cells using glucose. And you go, that doesn't sound very helpful. It stops our main cells using glucose and keeps glucose in the plasma for our brain cells to use that glucose when nutrients are very limited. So it has this unusual effect to preserve body activity and function in the starving state as well as causing us to grow. But the key mechanism I want to focus on today is the dominant role of growth hormone in regulating our growth, although it doesn't do so till about between 7 and 12 months old. Most of the growth hormone receptors are not produced at high enough levels till we're about 7 months of age. So our first year of growth is much more regulated by our nutrition than our hormone output in terms of growth hormone. So, in terms of its long-term effects, growth hormone stimulates our muscles to take up amino acids, increases protein synthesis in the liver and other tissues, but it also stimulates the growth of our bones and increases the calcification of the precursors of bone cartilage. And that continues throughout our life, that growth hormone will be important in stimulating cartilage turnover and renewal. In the short-term effects, growth hormone has much more of a metabolic role, so it changes fat and carbohydrate metabolism. And when we are fasted, when we are starving, the low levels of glucose stimulate growth hormone and cause this glucose-sparing effect to allow our central nervous system to have enough glucose to use. So in terms of our body size growth, the growth that we see is increase in the size and weight of our various body tissues, and this occurs at the individual cell level and across the whole body. Now, growth hormone is key for this, but other hormones, so we have to have adequate amounts of thyroid hormones. There is a thyroid hormone response element sitting in the growth hormone gene that turns the growth hormone gene on. But we also need other metabolites such as active vitamin D and parathyroid hormone, which are going to be responsible for balancing calcium and phosphate levels to give us enough organic nutrients to deposit into the bone as it grows. The gonadal gonadal steroids play a role in stimulating the growth at the end of our long bones. So our long bones grow in the middle, and then they grow to a point where they've got an active growth plate on either end. And so the bones get longer and longer by adding layers and layers of cells as they differentiate at the end of the bone called growth plates. And our gonadal steroids, when we go through puberty, produce hormones that cause terminal differentiation in those cartilaginous cells and convert them into bone cells, and then we stop growing. So we need adequate amounts of gonadal steroids which stimulate more growth hormone to be produced so that we grow very quickly, but they'll ultimately cause differentiation of our bones, and we will then no longer gain any further height. So they play a role in governing and differentiation of our growth. Obviously we need enough energy, so we need adequate amounts of insulin, and too higher levels of our stress hormones are inhibitory because they are inhibiting the differentiation and the growth of the individual bone cells as they mature within our growth plates. So when we look at growth velocity, well, we grow very quickly after we're born, and that reaches a plateau till we're about 12 to 16, and then we go through what's called a growth spurt, where we attain our final adult height. And then our growth plates fuse, and we can no longer gain any further vertical height. And these can be plotted on graphs like this. These are normal UK and EU growth charts that parents and GPs will fill out as your child grows. Now, when we look at the effects of growth hormone, we see that there's quite a consequence and quite a variation between species. We know that we can't give people that don't have enough growth hormone other species growth hormone and get them to grow. So you can't give a growth hormone deficient child that's not growing quickly enough pig, cattle, sheep, rat, mouse growth hormone. It doesn't work. It doesn't bind appropriately to their receptors. We've got to give human growth hormone to humans to make them grow. Now, before 1985, we didn't have any other source of growth hormone apart from dead people. So, in the mortuaries, the technicians used to be paid per pituitary that they took out at post-mortem, and the growth hormone was extracted and then used to treat growth hormone deficient individuals. That process had to be stopped when people developed Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, different forms of various viruses, hepatitis, etc., that can be passed on in this way. You couldn't treat the hormone enough to make it clean without denaturing the protein. So, in the 1980s, recombinant human growth hormone was then manufactured, and that's what's been used for many, many decades now to replace growth hormone. And growth hormone has become a drug of abuse. It acts like an anabolic steroid. You take growth hormone and you will increase your sports performance, you will increase your muscle bulk, you will dramatically reduce your fat content, and therefore athletes want to take it. So it's also a known drug of abuse. It can be used commercially. It's used commercially in the US to increase meat yields and milk yields in cattle. It's not authorised for use across Europe and the UK because we worry about the effects when making hormones in tissue. But you know it's only got a 15-minute half-life. It's not going to be hanging around in the system. So I like this funny cartoon where you don't really want to be taking growth hormone from another species. It doesn't work anyway. And any of the online growth hormone sources that you can find, often advertised in gyms, is to take growth hormone orally. I'm sorry, it's a peptide. It will be broken down in your stomach and have no use whatsoever. Growth hormone is a peptide with a fine 3D structure and therefore has to be injected. and it's actually very commonly abused in weightlifting and people who regularly use gyms. What are the consequences of altering growth hormone amounts in the body? So here we have a lady who has achondroplasia. This is a condition where the person has normal growth hormone, but they have a mutation in one of the fibroblast growth factor receptors, which means that their fibroblasts aren't converted in and form the long bones appropriately. So they have a normal sized head, chest, but have short limbs, short legs and arms. So that's the most common form of dwarfism, so short stature, that you see. Rarely you can find people that are growth hormone deficient and have what we call proportional short stature. So they're all in scale. Their knee just shrunk by half. So their body cavity, arms, legs are all in proportion to one another. Another form of proportional dwarfism here is called Laurent dwarfism. I've had the pleasure of meeting Ziv Laurent, who's named the phenotype. In these individuals, they've got lots of growth hormone, but their growth hormone receptor has a mutation that stops it working. And yet we have no way round the growth hormone receptor. We can't just give IGF-1, it doesn't make them grow. We need the growth hormone there. And this is her 5-year-old first cousin. And this is an 8-year-old child. As I said, thyroid hormone plays a role. These are two twins. This one has low thyroid hormone levels, this one is normal. So these are both 11-year-old twin sisters. So the low levels of thyroid hormone just reduce the amount of growth hormone that's being produced, and you get a reduction in the potential growth velocity of an individual. Too much growth hormone, and if it occurs before puberty, before the long bones are fused, then people will grow for longer and therefore get taller. So you can have people that are 7, 8 foot tall. And this usually comes about by the anterior pituitary becoming, or developing a tumour that overproduces growth hormone. These are not metastatic tumours that spread all over the body. They're just cells that keep multiplying, and they're producing more and more hormone, and therefore the person gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So often found if you go through and screen people that you want to be very tall to go and play volleyball or whatever, you screen a proportion of them, they'll have anterior pituitary tumours. If that tumour is not resected, then people will develop what's called acromegaly. Now, acromegaly is an excess of growth hormone as an adult. And these individuals usually come forward and keep saying, "Oh, doctor, I'm getting uglier and uglier as I get older." And they'll show you a series of photos that shows the changes in the cartilage of their face growing. Growth hormone still has a role to stimulate cartilage even after the long bones are fused. They're not going to get any taller, but the cartilage in your jaw, your ears, your nose, your eyebrows will keep growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So these people have these pronounced jaws, heavy eyebrows, wide noses, and if he smiled, his teeth would have gaps between them because the jaw has kept growing. Now this is the telltale sign of an athlete that's using growth hormone. You'll usually see them with braces to try and hold their teeth together and keep them straight. Go back and look at photos of Carlwood. Bit of a worry. So there's various athletes that have abused growth hormone over the year, and some of the American athletes who are believed to do so and broke a number of Olympic records, and one of those died very young due to heart malformations. So your growth hormone will keep making other tissues grow, and one of the side effects is to increase the size of the heart, which can cause lots of arrhythmias and cause premature death due to myocardial infarction. So there's big risks to taking excess growth hormone, because our organ systems can keep growing in response to it. So as our organs grow, it can be either an increase in cell number or an increase in cell size. Now, many of the cell growth early on is about increasing cell number. So you see increased cell division, and we talk about hyperplasia, so increase in the number of cells. Later on, we see that we get hypertrophy, so an increase in the size of cells. So anyone that goes to the gym and works out, you tend to be inducing hypertrophy, increase in the size of the muscle cells, which generates more actin and myosin parallel fibers sitting against one another, generating greater force. When this goes wrong, we get neoplasia, so increases in cell number, cell size, but also they tend to be very undifferentiated. So benign neoplasms don't tend to metastasize, they tend to keep a lot of their differentiated cell structure. Those that become very malignant usually lose their differentiation and can spread. So most growth is hyperplasia as we develop. So hopefully I've gone over both the thyroid axis, very common for it to go wrong, and then link that in to the growth hormone axis. So thank you very much for your attention, and again, sorry that we had to delay this lecture. But now you're all caught up, ready to next week to end the term. Okay, thank you very much.